strait and wholesome darkness of his cell, on his restoration to the enjoyment of light and liberty? Am I to congratulate an highwayman and murderer who has broke prison upon the recovery of his natural rights? This would be to act over again the scene of the criminals condemned to the galleys, and their heroic deliverer, the metaphysic Knight of the Sorrowful Countenance.
This is an important point, and it is characteristic of Burke's thinking. Philosophically, that is, considered abstractly, liberty is good. But in a world of concretes, in a world of real humans and political institutions, liberty can lead to good or to bad consequences. Before we congratulate a nation for attaining liberty, therefore, we should understand the kind of liberty it has attained and the use to which it is put.
When I see the spirit of liberty in action, I see a strong principle at work. And this, for a while, is all I can possibly know of it. The wild gas, the fixed air is plainly broke loose. But we ought to suspend our judgment until the first effervescence is a little subsided, till the liquor is cleared, and until we see something deeper than the agitation of a troubled and frothy surface. I must be tolerably sure, before I venture publicly to congratulate men upon a blessing, that they have really received one.
Liberty brings power in its wake, and when every person in a nation enjoys liberty, every person in that nation acquires power. This, Burke warns, can be extremely dangerous, especially among people who, unaccustomed to wielding power, do not understand or respect its limits.
The effect of liberty to individuals is that they may do what they please. We ought to see what it will please them to do before we risk congratulations, which may be soon turned into complaints. Prudence would dictate this in the case of separate, insulated, private men. But liberty, when men act in bodies, is power. Considerate people, before they declare themselves, will observe the use which is made of power, and particularly of so trying a thing as new power in new persons of whose principles, tempers, and dispositions they have little or no experience.
Burke, as we said, does not oppose natural rights per se. They are the proper concern of philosophers. But the consideration of abstract rights should be confined, as Burke says, to the schools, that is, to philosophers and academics. The statesman, however, is a practical man of politics, not a philosopher. And though the statesman should take philosophy into account, his decisions and evaluations should not be determined by abstract principles. The statesman should take circumstances into account, including the past institutions, customs, and habits of a people. Human beings are concrete, living things filled with emotions and prejudices. They are not abstractions, and the statesman who attempts to govern them by abstractions is courting disaster. Some commentators have portrayed Burke as hostile to all principles, to principles as such. Burke, they say, is concerned with expediency, with consequences, with what works in fact. Again, however, this misconstrues what Burke is getting at. In a speech before Parliament in 1792, Burke clarified his position.
I never govern myself. No rational man ever did govern himself by abstractions and universals. I do not put abstract ideas wholly out of any question, because I well know that under that name I should dismiss principles, and that without the guide and light of sound, well-understood principles, all reasonings in politics, as in everything else, would be only a confused jumble of particular facts and details, without the means of drawing out any sort of theoretical or practical conclusion.
After conceding the importance of principles, Burke distinguishes between philosophers and statesmen.
A statesman differs from a professor in a university. The latter has only the general view of society. The former, the statesman, has a number of circumstances to combine with those general ideas and to take into his consideration. Circumstances are infinite and infinitely combined, are variable and transient, He who does not take them into consideration is not erroneous, but stark mad. He is metaphysically mad. A statesman, never losing sight of principles, is to be guided by circumstances, and judging contrary to the exigencies of the moment, he may ruin his country forever.
Burke's rhetoric can sometimes obscure the point he wishes to make, and this rhetoric is unsurpassed when it comes to denouncing abstract rights. But the basic message of Burke's argument is clear enough. Defenders of abstract rights apply their principles without regard for circumstances, without regard for the customs, habits, and prejudices of a people. Abstract rights may be perfectly rational, but human beings are not. French revolutionaries were trying to pound the square peg of human nature into the round hole of abstract rights. And ultimately, according to Burke, they would resort to violence as the only way to accomplish this. Again and again, Burke chastises the proponents of abstract rights for ignoring the consequences of their actions. Truth in politics is not the same as truth in philosophy.
The practical consequences of any political tenet go a great way in deciding upon its value. Political problems do not primarily concern truth and falsehood. They relate to good or evil. What in the result is likely to produce evil is politically false. That which is productive of good, politically true.
We have seen how Edmund Burke repudiates abstract natural rights as a criterion to assess political affairs, and how he believes the wise statesman, with an eye to good or evil consequences, will take complex circumstances into account. Now, let's see how the Reflections applies this reasoning to the French Revolution, and how it leads to Burke's prediction that the French Revolution will end in chaos and bloodshed. When the French National Assembly triumphed over the nobility and the clergy and became the supreme legislative body of France, it set about to demolish the old order of feudal laws and aristocratic privilege. The National Assembly raised Frenchmen from subjects to citizens with equal rights under the law. In so doing, the National Assembly was building a new commonwealth based on the rights of man. But this, according to Burke, was a dangerous undertaking. Why? Because in disowning their ancient institutions, the French deprived themselves of the wisdom gained through experience, the wisdom embedded in ancient institutions. The French wished to use abstract principles to chart their new course, but this, Burke believes, is like setting sail without a rudder.
The science of constructing a commonwealth, or renovating it, or reforming it, is, like every other experimental science, not to be taught without experience. Nor is it a short experience that can instruct us in that practical science, because the real effects of moral causes are not always immediate. But that which in the first instance is prejudicial may be excellent in its remoter operation, and its excellence may arise even from the ill effects it produces in the beginning. The reverse also happens, and very plausible schemes, with very pleasing commencements, have often shameful and lamentable conclusions.
Abstract rights, Burke argues, can never provide sound guidance in the complicated matter of constructing a new state.
These metaphysic rights entering into common life, like rays of light which pierce into a dense medium, are by the laws of nature refracted from their straight line. Indeed, in the gross and complicated mass of human passions and concerns, the primitive rights of men undergo such a variety of refractions and reflections that it becomes absurd to talk of them as if they continued in the simplicity of their original direction. The nature of man is intricate. The objects of society are of the greatest possible complexity, and therefore no simple disposition or direction of power can be suitable either to man's nature or to the quality of his affairs.
Prudence, Burke contends, is the first among political virtues, and the prudent statesman must often balance conflicting forces. He must often compromise between good and evil. This is why the statesman should not be guided by abstract principles. Such principles do not allow compromise.
The pretended rights of these theorists are all extremes, and in proportion as they are metaphysically true, they are morally and politically false. The rights of men are in a sort of middle, incapable of definition, but not impossible to be discerned. The rights of men in governments are their advantages, and these are often imbalances between differences of good, in compromises sometimes between good and evil, and sometimes between evil and evil. Political reason is a computing principle, adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing morally, not metaphysically or mathematically, true moral denominations.
The abstract principles of revolutionaries do not permit compromise, and since no government can exist without compromise, all governments will be vulnerable to revolution.
These professors, finding their extreme principles not applicable to cases which call only for a qualified, or as I may say, civil and legal resistance, in such cases employ no resistance at all. It is with them a war or a revolution, or it is nothing. Finding their schemes of politics not adapted to the state of the world in which they live, they often come to think lightly of all public principle, and are ready, on their part, to abandon for a very trivial interest what they find of very trivial value.
When revolutionary fanatics focus on the purity of their principles, they forget about consequences. Then, flesh and blood people become grist for their mill.
Considering their speculative designs as of infinite value, and the actual arrangement of the state as of no estimation, they are at best indifferent about it. They see no merit in the good, and no fault in the vicious management of public affairs. They rather rejoice in the latter, as more propitious to revolution. They see no merit or demerit in any man, or any action, or any political principle, any farther than as they may forward or retard their design a change. They therefore take up one day the most violent and stretched prerogative, and another time the wildest democratic ideas of freedom, and pass from the one to the other without any sort of regard to cause, to person, or to party.
As revolutionaries become indifferent to other people, they pervert their own human nature. They become insensitive to suffering and bloodshed.
The worst of these politics of revolution is this: they temper and harden the breast in order to prepare it for the desperate strokes which are sometimes used in extreme occasions. But as these occasions may never arrive, the mind receives a gratuitous taint, and the moral sentiments suffer not a little when no political purpose is served by the deprivation. This sort of people are so taken up with their theories about the rights of man that they have totally forgot his nature. Without opening one new avenue to the understanding, they have succeeded in stopping up those that lead to the heart. They have perverted in themselves, and in those that attend to them, all the well-placed sympathies of the human breast.
Revolutionaries, bent on the uncompromising fulfillment of their abstract schemes, will stop at nothing to achieve their goals.
Plots, massacres, assassinations seem to some people a trivial price for obtaining a revolution. A cheap, bloodless reformation, a guiltless liberty, appear flat and vapid to their taste. There must be a great change of scene. There must be a magnificent stage effect. There must be a grand spectacle to rouse the imagination.
Earlier, we saw how Edmund Burke opposes the democratic thrust of the French Revolution. Now we can better understand his position. For Burke, the primary issue is not who governs a country, but how it is governed. The lamp post mentioned in this passage refers to a convenient gallery